Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of Getting to Gold. We are here every Tuesday usually, but today is a bonus episode. And we are here with Holly, and she is going to talk to us about how to build a full-time business on a part-time schedule. You know, I am your host, your main girl, Jessie B at J-Bull Consulting. I am the managing attorney at J-Bull Consulting Firm, LLC, where we help small businesses and creatives create a strong legal foundation by building their brand and protecting their business. So this is our series, Getting to Gold. If you haven't got a chance, we have some awesome episodes. You should definitely check them out. But today we're talking to Holly. So Holly, introduce yourself to the people. Let them know who you are, what you do, where you shake.
Yeah. So my name is Holly Haynes. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. Most importantly, I'm married. I have twin daughters who are 7. So all the fun happening in quarantine right now. I work full-time for a nonprofit, and then I also have a full-time coaching business. So I have a 20-year corporate strategy career. I've been an entrepreneur for about 5 years, starting in network marketing and then recently pivoting to strategic coaching for side hustlers. So I call myself the side hustle coach, really helping those of you who are working full time and wanting to grow a business at the same time. It is possible. I have a podcast called Crush the Rush. And yeah, that's sort of the quick and dirty about what I do and who I am.
Okay, awesome. Holly is doing it all, y'all. She got the podcast, she got the full-time job, she got the mom. Like, woo, Holly, you running, girl. I love it. Okay, because that is how most of us are, right? Like, no one's usually just doing one thing. That's right. Entrepreneurship. So I love sharing stories. So Holly, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of a sneak peek of your journey from moving from being a strategic strategist. What did you say? A consultant or?
I did strategic consulting, which basically means big companies hire you to come in and do their like strategic roadmap planning. So let's say, I don't know, I worked for Express. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Express, like the clothing brand, and they would hire us to come in and sort of map out their goals and their visions and then sort of help them build the systems on the back end to support that.
Okay. And so you did that for you said about 15 years?
Yeah. So I'm still doing it now. I'm old. I'm almost 42. So I've done it for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. I started out working for sort of the big 5 consulting firms, which is what they used to call it, and then moved into local consulting because I didn't want to travel once I had my girls. And then just recently pivoted to do work for a nonprofit. Same work, just sort of a little bit of a different schedule, a little less intense, and a little more focused on sort of the mission and vision, which I like.
Okay. I like that. That's awesome. She's like, I had a pivot. So, I mean, between all this transition, at some point you were like, it would be fun? Starting a business.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me what made you decide, like, you know what? I'm transitioning to corporate. You say you're still working full time. You're doing a nonprofit. But on top of that, you're like, I want to start a business. So what was the idea? Were you like in your bed one day, like, you know what? I can help people.
Yeah, it's very organic. I did not wake up and be like, I'm going to be the side hustle strategist today. Mm-hmm. I actually was lucky enough to get my MBA paid for by a company that I worked for. And I remember sitting in the classes being like, oh, well, I can do some of these things. And they were talking about these small businesses and how they grew and scaled. And then a lot of them were really focused on helping women. Mm-hmm. And really putting women front and center and teaching them to be leaders and things like that. And I was like, I don't know, a little flag just sort of went off in the back of my head. Like I can specifically remember the class that I was sitting in, but I didn't really know what to do with it. So it kind of sat there for a while.
Okay.
And then after I had my girls, I sort of stumbled into network marketing. Mm-hmm. I did a health and fitness company and ended up losing 60 pounds and was able to really build a team organically by just sort of sharing what I was doing. I sort of related it to sharing my favorite pair of jeans. Like people could tell that I was doing something different. They would ask, I would share it, and it just very organically happened.
Okay.
Which then introduced me to the whole like entrepreneurship world, podcasts, like mentorship, personal development, all of that. And long story short, people kept asking me, how are you doing what you're doing? How are you building this, network marketing team and still working full time? And at the time, my girls were little. And so I just organically started sharing that as part of my marketing for my then network marketing business. And it's sort of, I guess probably, a year ago, I was like, maybe I can do something with it. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to launch podcasts. Like, that seems like a reasonable thing to do.
Okay.
And again, just sort of like building on what people were asking. I was listening to what people were telling me, what was helpful for them. And I was like, I'll do a podcast. And I literally launched my podcast like the day COVID hit the United States. Like that was my first episode. And I was like, oh my, like, what does this mean? So I hired a coach and I joined a mastermind and really just dove in knowing what I know how to do best, and that's strategically plan. And so I listened to the feedback that I was getting and then have, since launched a coaching business. I have a couple courses, Facebook community, sort of all the things. But it's been very organic based on sort of what I love to do and what people have asked me for help with.
Okay.
Sort of blending those together.
I think that makes sense. What I like about your story is what sometimes I think we forget as business owner is like, are you providing something that somebody's asking for? Because sometimes you're doing something nobody asked for. Like nobody asked for that, and Holly said, no, they were asking for it. And out of that, you were able to build. It just sounded like a lot of building. I want to talk about a little bit about your podcast, because a lot of people, me included, I'm a small business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, and I talk to a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs. Yeah. And one of the things, you want to do is make content and be able to provide value to your audience in some way. And I know podcasting is super popular. Yeah. So why don't you kind of like give us a little tip? Like if I'm interested in starting a podcast, or what kind of industries would be best for starting a podcast, or like what things I should consider when I'm thinking about doing a podcast? Anything you can provide for entrepreneurs, because nobody wants to get on a podcast where you're just selling. Nobody likes that.
No. You definitely don't want to do that. So the first thing I think you want to do is really think about, it's very cliche, but think about your why. Like, what is your point of having the podcast? Like, what are you wanting to deliver? And then what is your niche? And this helps me a lot in just my social media as well, because I feel like when I first started, I was like, oh, I'm going to target busy moms. Well, there's like 100 million busy moms, and they're all different, right? When I pivoted to, I'm a busy mom who works full time with twins, who wants to build a side hustle, it was very different. And so I think you have to have a very clear niche. Like if you're a virtual assistant, maybe you're a virtual assistant that focuses on Pinterest who works full time. Like it has to be so nailed down, because the category of podcasts that I'm in is competing with like the Jenna Kutchers and, some of those big names. But the thing is it doesn't really matter how many podcasts there are out there. It matters if you're reaching 10 people, are they the right people? And are they people that are going to want to follow you and invest in you and, get ready to know you and then like you and then trust you when you eventually make a sale? So I took quite a bit of time, probably a couple of months, to really niche down and think about, like who I was talking to, what I was going to provide. And then again, I listened to feedback. So what are people asking me? I would do polls in my Instagram stories or send emails out and ask them like, what topics would be helpful for you? If you're building a business, what do you want to know? What are you struggling with? But I was making sure I was asking it to my sort of person. And so that would be my first tip. Don't start a podcast unless you are like absolutely clear on that. And it can change as you go. Okay. So I did that. And then I actually took a free course. It's really amazing. So I host my podcast through Buzzsprout, which is a platform that you can do it on. Okay. And they have a free course of like how to start a podcast. And so I printed it out and I took the course. I just did it step by step. I bought the equipment, I followed their instructions, and I launched my first episode probably 6 weeks later. Wow. It was not the most, I mean, it sounded professional, but I mean, I didn't buy the most fancy equipment. You don't have to invest like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I did my own marketing. After I got into it a little bit more, I did end up outsourcing the editing, which is a whole nother game, but you could totally do it yourself. And so I would just encourage you to understand like why you want to create the show and how you're going to create it. So you're going to do it weekly or bi-weekly or have episodes or seasons. And the free training walks through how to do that.
Okay.
Then make sure that you niche down so that you know exactly who you're talking to and talk to them on the podcast.
Okay.
So those are a couple tips. I would say the one last thing that helped is I would dig into Facebook groups and ask questions. And then when I would connect with people through my various social media channels, I would ask them questions, and then I would eventually ask them to be guests on the show.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Holly gave a lot of really good tips right there about niching down. She said she took some training, which means she didn't try to do it all herself. She said she outsourced so it could be done more efficiently. She said she thought about it for a while. What it was like 6 weeks. She networked. So there was a lot of different tips on what you can do. And honestly, a lot of those steps that she mentioned, you can really use that for creating a lot of content, right? Either whether on Facebook, using Pinterest. It's more about educating yourself about the proper strategy. And that makes sense because Holly's all about the strategy.
And I'll say one thing that I'm really trying to focus on is have a omnipresent social media or content strategy, which basically means you're only creating content once, but you're sharing it in multiple places. So I may do a podcast on Tuesdays that come out on Tuesdays, but you'll probably see it on the blog the same time. I just translate it and then post it in a different place. Or if I do a video in my Facebook group, you'll probably see it on Instagram TV a little bit later, or you might see a blog post repurposed on Pinterest. So there's a whole strategy that I use to sort of cross-pollinate when I'm only creating one thing, but it's going all different directions.
Maximizing your content. I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. If you're going to put it on one platform, you can usually put it on quite a few, just kind of tweak it a little bit. So I think that's really, really smart. I did want to kind of shift a little bit because I wanted to know what surprised you about starting your business, because you have been working for a while. And even though you were still in your field, running a business and working, as an employee or even an independent contractor where you do projects is different. So what surprised you about starting your business?
Good question. I think for the most part, it takes like 10 times longer than you actually think it's going to take.
Yeah.
Mainly because you're doing it like, it's a side hustle. And so you've got to set aside time, which is really sort of how I got to where I got. I was like, I've got to find a better way to get things done. I'm not going to survive off of doing this, a half-hour day. So how do I create systems and a strategy for myself so that I can be most productive in really small pockets of time? Because it is work. I think a lot of people think like, oh, I'm just going to sign up for something and then voila, it's going to work for me. And some things will, but you definitely have to put in the consistency and the dedication.
That makes sense to me. And honestly, that brings me to the question that I think is most important, which is what are common mistakes that people make when starting and running their side hustle? Like, what do you see often?
I think the number one mistake is consistency. So, and this happened to me quite a bit at the beginning, and a lot of times to my one-on-one clients, it's like you go all in at the beginning, and let's say you work like 5 hours till like midnight one night, and you're like, I did it. And then the next day you're exhausted, so you don't do anything. And then Wednesday you're like, I don't know. And then Thursday you're like, okay, maybe I'll just do a half hour. Like, you've got to be so consistent for a decent amount of time to see growth. And so I always tell my clients, I would rather you do 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week, than completely skip whatever you need to do for 2 weeks and then try to jump back in. People are going to expect you to be consistent. You build trust by being consistent. You build momentum by being consistent. And if you aren't able to dedicate 10 or 20 minutes a day, then at a minimum, you should try, on the weekends, if you're working full time, to say like, these are my business hours and I'm going to do 2 hours on Saturday because I can't get to it during the week. Still building that consistency. Because I think so often people start out so excited and then, life happens and they're like, I don't know what to do. And so I really try to focus on one thing at a time, half hour a day. Monday through Thursday, I even say, and then use Friday sort of as catch-up day.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I think the other thing is when you're building a side hustle while you're working full-time or you're working another job, because maybe you're only working, I'm not gonna say only, maybe you're working 30, 35 hours and you're working to build your side hustle. It's almost like a muscle. You have to, it's a muscle. So really that's why the consistency is so important, and the spurts, right? It's just like when you exercise, if you run like crazy on Monday, you could be sore Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you could get more done if you do it in short intervals. And so, don't be hard on yourself trying to do everything in one big spurt. Yeah, you'll have nights where you feel inspired and you're like, oh my, I call it like a little bit of like a crackhead mode. You're like, oh, I got it. But that can't be every night, right? Like
if you're balancing family and a full-time job, like you'll burn out.
You gotta get up in the morning. You can't call out of work because you decided you wanted to have your third planning session that week. You gotta get up and go to work the next day. So I think that's really relevant. You have to think about it like a muscle, something that you're growing, and as time continues, you will get faster and big. Because not just about growing the business, it's about getting used to technology, it's about creating a system, it's all of these different elements that I can promise you have not considered that will pop up and smack you. So Holly talks a lot about strategy and how she introduced, but what I really wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more is, I noticed that you talked a lot about how you use your stories and social media in order to boost your side hustle. What I think what I want to know is, how did you transition your personal Instagram and Facebook, right? Like, oh, I'm just here with the family, to kind of integrating your side hustle in a way that people are like, oh, I'm taking it seriously? Because I think some of the conundrum or some of the concerns of people who are doing side hustles with their full-time is that people aren't taking them seriously. They're considering it like a hobby or just something they're doing. So how can someone who wants to really get, make it serious to their client, get to those ideal customers and clients, and transition without it kind of being weird? I don't want to say weird, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think that's really a concern for a lot of full-time people when they're trying to transition into also doing a side hustle.
Yeah. So a couple things. So my personal Facebook page, like with my name, that I post like family pictures to, I typically do not post any business to at all. I keep it separate. When I first started, I focused on one platform and growing that, and Instagram. I didn't even really have an Instagram account, so I created a business account. And I started showing up, again, consistency. But what I've seen lately, because what I did 5 years ago is definitely not where Instagram is right now. It changes all the time. But having a clear content plan, like content is so valuable right now. And so I try every week, I will do like a live video or a teaching, like here are 3 tips, and it doesn't have to be long or complicated.
Nope.
Or I will, tell a compelling story about a transformation and then give tips on how I did it. So people are wanting to come back to be like, well, what is she sharing? Because that free training was so amazing. Like, I want to see what else she's doing. And so I try to deliver as much free content as I can. And so it's less about like, look at me in this selfie, which I think most like personal pages are, in like a nice way.
I love a good selfie.
And more like tips and tricks and content. You can definitely see a difference. And if you even scroll back through my Instagram, you could totally see when I shifted from like the selfie to like, oh, I'm going to start delivering some content and see if this works. And it does.
That's really good. I know that a lot of people are concerned about that, and social media can seem a little overwhelming because it is. They keep changing it on us, but don't feel discouraged. I think the takeaway from what Holly said is that she started with one platform And that is so true. I think I started on two. I started on Facebook and Instagram, and then I kind of niched down into Instagram, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do Instagram because that seems to be working. And those are the two platforms I focus on. And now I've expanded into Twitter and YouTube, and I feel more comfortable. But especially if you weren't like a big social media person to begin with. Oh, don't try to be on LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, Fiverr, TikTok. Like, you're going to wear yourself out trying to learn every single software. So kind of look at what people in your industry are doing and seeing where do they seem to shine? Where do it seem like people interact with the most? You might have to play around. Maybe you play around on Facebook and you're getting really good engagement. So focus on Facebook, or maybe you're getting really great engagement on Twitter. So focus on Twitter. Go where you know the best. Because again, it's a side hustle. So it's going to take a little time and you're building the muscle. So I completely endorse what you just said. I was not social media savvy when I first started. If you talk to some people, managers, they would still argue that I don't know what I'm doing. But you know what? I've come a long way. I'm not worried about that. So, Holly, let's talk about your expertise, right? We're going to talk about what is something, or what is your takeaway, or something that you can give to anyone who is looking to move from, maybe working full time or working a job at 35, and I want to start really getting into their side hustle. What are something that you can share? What advice that you can share with them about moving forward with that?
Yeah. So the very first thing that I always teach in both my courses and to my clients is the strategy piece. And it's not about what you're going to do tomorrow or this week. It's where do you want to be 3 to 5 years from now? And people get like so nervous to talk about it, but we do this exercise called Be, Feel, Do, Have. And if you're a Jen Sincero fan, she talks about this a lot in her book. She's the You're a Badass author. And it's really like, where do you want to be? What do you want to have? And what do you want to do? And how is your business going to facilitate that? And so it's really thinking about, like, maybe you really like your job and you just want to do, something for fun. Or maybe you don't like your job and you're looking to find something completely different to do. And so it's really thinking about like your long-term vision first, so that when you get into the systems and the social media and like things go crazy during the day, which they will, you've got that vision up here. So you can say like, hey, is this aligned with what I said I wanted to do? Yes or no. And then you can pivot based on where that is. And so I always recommend, it's not hard. It takes like 20 minutes, like build a very simple strategy first, just mapping out like in 3 years, what would the perfect day be like? What would your business look like? What would your job look like? What would your kids be doing? What would you be doing? And start there. And then you can really start to figure out like, how are you going to get there? And then you can think about on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis or even a weekly basis, like what are the best next steps? I always think of Frozen 2. This is what we watch in our house. It's like, do the best next thing. When you've got that bigger vision, you can literally say like, okay, the best next thing is for me to start an Instagram, or the best next thing is for me to start a blog. And then after that, the best next thing is for me to niche down so I can share better content. And so it's just like a stair-step approach instead of being overwhelmed by like, oh, I want to start a business. Well, why do you want to do it? And then how are you going to do it? And then how is that aligned with where you want to be, 3 years from now?
That's really good. That's really good. So I know you talk about building a strategy, but I also know that you have mentioned to me about building a system.
Yeah.
Right? What does that look like? She said that's the secret sauce, y'all. Talk to us about building a system when you are trying to launch your side hustle or even work in your side hustle. Because this is not just for starters. This is for anyone, right? Like,
yeah. No, anyone can do this. So one of the things that I started to realize is as I was growing and more people were sort of coming into my business, I needed a way to scale, but I did not have more time. So I didn't have more time to give. And so I had to figure out a way to automate and duplicate so that I could continue growing. And there are a bunch of different systems that you can use. And a system can be a routine, but a routine is not always a system, if that makes sense. So like,
no, that makes sense.
so a system for me is my morning routine, because I have set business hours where I do specific things every morning. That's one of my systems. So a system can be very simple, or it can be as complex as an email marketing campaign, which is how I've been able to scale. And that is, and I think you've probably talked about this in your groups before, is you have, you know, sort of your platform where you're sharing all the things, and then you're trying to start a relationship with somebody. So you have some sort of like lead magnet or freebie or whatever you want to call it that you're delivering value. And so I created those. And then I said, okay, well, I don't want that to just end. I'm going to continue to nurture them through the back end while I'm working on automation to get them sort of to know me, to like me, to trust me, and then eventually make a sale. So I created systems to do that. And then I also created systems to onboard new clients, new team members, basically anything that I was repeating and I could automate, I try to do. And so a really good exercise is to write down sort of what you do maybe in a week or a month.
Okay.
And look at what you're repeating. And if you can streamline it, or, you know, it's even as easy as like copying and pasting something and saving it for later so that you could use it later, or creating some sort of automated email system, which is really how I've been able to scale.
That makes sense. Holly said to schedule, right? Automate, nurture, sale. You notice you didn't say sale. So, so building a system is really important. And if you are really new to a side hustle, you might not know what a freebie is or what an email workflow is, but you can take that time to kind of get yourself educated about what that looks like, and what automation looks like for you. I think she made a really good suggestion about writing down repetitive actions. I can promise you, if you're doing it, there's an app for it. Like, it's crazy. I love it so much. So the last thing I kind of wanted to brush up on is, you know, we talked about social media quite a bit, and we talked about strategy. We talked about building a system. I think the last most natural thing is to ask about social media schedules. You know, if I'm an entrepreneur, I might post it every, you know, month or two, you know, as a personal account. What does consistency, or what kind of social media schedule should I be looking at moving forward? Because I've never made a calendar before, so I don't really know what that looks like. You know, do you have any tips for anyone who's interested in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone's going to share with you all the different ways that they build content. And what I have found,
so many ways,
specifically for those of us that work full time or are limited on time, I don't plan my content monthly. I plan it weekly.
Okay.
Because technically, well, I just don't have 4 or 5 hours to sit down and write like 12 posts and blog. Like I just don't have that kind of time. So what I'll do is on Sunday evenings, I will go in and I'll say, okay, here's my theme for the week. Here's 2 or 3 types of posts that I'm going to do. Again, circulating through a personal story, a transformation, sharing some sort of teaching or tips, like what is the best way that I can deliver value on this topic. If I have time, I will write them. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I at a minimum will put like 3 or 4 bullet points together for each post of like what I want to do or how I'm going to say it. And that's my content plan. I very strategically map out, you know, individual posts, and then if you follow me on Instagram, you see I actually have an agenda that I follow in my Instagram stories. Like, you'll know, like, hey, Holly's going to I talked about mindset this morning, and tomorrow I'm doing a day in a life. Like, you can see the agenda in my stories. So I map my, you know, 2 or 3 posts a week, and then I map my stories. My goal is 2 posts a week. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And then I try 5 or 10 stories on Instagram. And then I also will do like 1 blog post, and then I have my podcast. But it's all typically mapped out before the work week starts. So I know exactly what I need to do, how I need to do it. And when I have a half hour of free time, I can dig in. I don't have to think about it. It's all done for me. I have stock photos that I take on the weekends or ahead of time, so I can just use it and go. So I do that. And then my goal is to connect or network 20 to 30 minutes a day, Monday through Thursday. So that's, following up with my clients, engaging on the different platforms, asking questions, things like that. So during the week, it's maybe like a 45-minute a day, Monday through Thursday activity.
Okay.
But it's all planned out before I start. And I will say some days that's the only thing that I do for my business during the day because I don't have time.
Yeah. But you're doing something. I think, you're doing something, and that's what matters.
I'm very consistent.
Right. Oh, Callie. She said, I'm very consistent. I don't even feel like I even need to ask you what the takeaway is. The takeaway is Holly said, if you can't hear it from the back, you need to be consistent. That's what Holly said over and over and over again. That is the takeaway that I got. So Holly, listen, how can these people find you? How can they connect with you? If they're like, you know what, I want to know more.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Yeah, so you can find me at hollymariehaynes.com. And when you go on the website, right there in the front, there is a side hustle starter kit that you can download. And there are 3 sections, which are the ones that we chatted about today. It is strategy, systems, and social media. I have broken it down into like 2 minutes of content. And then there's templates that you can use to go through exactly what we chatted about. So It's all laid out for you.
We love free stuff.
Yeah. If you want more tips, I typically talk about all of these on the podcast, which is Crush the Rush.
Crush, that's such a cute name. Yeah. And I also included the starter kit in the description, guys. So you can actually click on the link and it will take you right to it. So you can download it and, go over to Instagram, follow Holly, check out what she's doing, because even though she may specialize in side hustle, she says some things that me as a full-time entrepreneur can also utilize, right? Like staying consistent, building a strategy, having a system. She said she was saying it for your side hustle, but the truth is, if you're running a business, you should be doing this.
Yeah, my side hustle is a full-time hustle. Let's face it.
It is. It is. It definitely is. I want to encourage all my side hustlers out there that you are a business and you are legitimate and what you're doing matters and it's important. I think sometimes, if you feel like you're working a full-time job, that people aren't taking you seriously, but we are taking you seriously. Take yourself seriously, take your business seriously. It doesn't matter if you're working another job, it is legitimate. And I would encourage you to continue the journey. Like I said, it's like building a muscle. You don't wake up one day and you become a champion. You have to keep working at it, give yourself grace and love, and you will get there. Okay. So I just wanted to give it, side hustlers are close to my heart. I want y'all guys to be, I want you to do your dreams and I want you to have the business that you can have, even if you are working full time. Be patient with yourself. Okay. Holly, you have been fantastic. You have given us so many tips. I'm just like, I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch because I was like, I need to take some notes. I was trying to pay attention, but I was like, oh, she said some good stuff up here. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being on this episode of Getting to Gold. And you guys have a good rest of the day. And remember, wear your mask. Bye.
Bye.